On a cold October day, a man walked in. Expensive cologne, distant eyes, carried the weight of years of secrets.
Imagine discovering out of the blue that the person you thought was your salvation actually has a dark past that could destroy everything good you know. An adoption should be a chance for a new life, but what really happened when the truth radically changed the destiny of a poor orphan? Prepare for a game of power, manipulation, and revealed secrets. And in the end, judge for yourself who will truly be the victim. Take a moment and comment where you're following our story from. Let's go.
Dreamed of fairy tales, just wanted to love.
My name is Dorothy, and if you were to ask me about the things I've seen in my life, I can guarantee that nothing could have prepared me for what was about to happen. I worked for over 30 years in the Social Services Department of Cedar Falls, a small town where everyone knows everyone, and where, somehow, everyone has a secret. Abandoned children, broken families, adoptions gone wrong. I had seen it all. But nothing ever compared to what would happen on that cold October morning in 2008. I was organizing some papers, my mind wandering far from my work, when the doorbell rang. I looked up, wondering who it could be. The sound of the door hitting the wall made me stand up suddenly. When I saw him, I couldn't help but notice the difference in that man who entered the room. He looked like a figure straight out of a movie, someone who was far beyond my reach. A perfect gray suit, impeccably combed gray hair, Italian leather shoes shining even under the dim office light. He carried a leather briefcase that seemed more expensive than my entire 3-month salary. His name was Vincent Hartwell. Everyone in Cedar Falls knew who he was. The man who owned half the town, the owner of the largest construction company in the region. He lived in the most imposing mansion in town, on top of the hill. His name and his family were synonymous with wealth and power. But what surprised me at that moment was the fact that he was there, in a place like my office, in a town like Cedar Falls. He seemed as out of place as a fish out of water. "Good morning, Dorothy," he said with a soft yet authoritative voice. "I'd like to speak with the person responsible for adoption processes." I didn't know what to think. My eyes narrowed for a moment, trying to understand what he really wanted. But before I could formulate any question, I called our supervisor, Helen, who entered with that professional smile she always wore, but looking at me, I could sense a slight apprehension on her face. Helen, with her calm and experienced demeanor, shook Vincent's hand politely. "Hello, Mr. Hartwell. How can I help you?" He looked at Helen with the same unshakable expression he used when talking to the city council. But this time, something in his eyes seemed different. There was something behind them that I couldn't read. "I would like to adopt a child," he said. "A girl, to be exact. I already have one in mind." I, who until then had pretended to be busy organizing papers, felt a shiver run down my spine. I knew something was wrong there. You don't adopt a child like that, as if buying an item in a store. It shouldn't be like that at all. "Which child, Mr. Hartwell?" Helen asked, still trying to understand the situation. I was trying too. He was there, a powerful man, with no explanation as to why he suddenly wanted to adopt a child. Adoption was complex, not simple, and the way he was approaching it seemed wrong. "Emma Sullivan," Vincent replied with a disturbing calm. "She's at St. Mary's Orphanage. I've already met her." Helen looked at me, and I noticed that her gaze, for a brief moment, reflected the same surprise I felt. Emma Sullivan. I knew her well. Everyone in the department knew her. An 8-year-old girl with immense green eyes and curly brown hair, always with an inexplicable sadness in her gaze. She had arrived at the orphanage after her mother died in a car accident. There were no other relatives to care for her, and now she was there, at the mercy of a system that often wasn't fair. "She's been at the orphanage for a while," Helen said, her voice slightly tense. "How do you know Emma?" Vincent adjusted his tie, as if he was more interested in the formal aspect of the conversation than in Helen's questions. "During one of my visits to the orphanage, I saw Emma and, well, she touched my heart. There's something about her, something special. I could feel the lie in the air. Never, in all the years I worked there, had I seen a man so desperate to adopt a specific child. It wasn't normal. I knew that. Families usually were willing to meet different children, to understand their stories before choosing. But Vincent Hartwell had already chosen. He already had the child he wanted. Mr. Hartwell, how do you know Emma is the right child for your family? Helen asked cautiously. I know she's the one, he said firmly. I can pay any necessary fees, hire the best lawyers, do whatever it takes to speed up the process. Money is not an issue. It was at that moment that something inside me warmed with a bad feeling. I had seen families desperate to adopt, but never anyone so obsessed with a specific child. He was treating that process as if it were a business, something to be done and closed. The feeling of discomfort I felt increased with every word he said. Helen tried to explain to him that the adoption process would be lengthy, with several verification procedures, but Vincent seemed completely impassive. He wanted Emma, and that was all. He didn't want to hear anything else, didn't want to know about time or rules. He wanted that girl, and he would do whatever it took to have her. When he left the office, leaving behind only the scent of his expensive perfume, a feeling of unease lingered in the air. The aroma of his presence, of power, of something that didn't fit, left me restless. Do you think something is wrong? I asked Helen. She slowly shook her head, without taking her eyes off the papers in her hands. I don't know, Dorothy, but I've never seen anyone so determined, so obsessive. Something isn't right. I knew what she meant. Vincent Hartwell wasn't there to adopt a child. He was there to do what he always did in his life, control. In the days that followed Vincent Hartwell's visit, something inside me couldn't rest. He wasn't just eager to adopt a child, he was desperate. The fact that he wanted to adopt Emma, an 8-year-old girl I knew well, made me uneasy. I couldn't understand why he was so obsessed with her, in such an impersonal, cold way. He wasn't there to help a child have a family, he was there to do something much more personal. And I knew I needed to find out what. With every call Vincent made to our office, the feeling of discomfort grew. He was in constant contact, pressing for more information, demanding more details, more speed. He hired expensive lawyers, paid the best psychologists to speed up the evaluation process, and made generous donations to our department, as if he were buying the right to adopt Emma. When he made his second visit to our office, he was accompanied by a lawyer from Portland, a tall man, with piercing eyes and an impersonal demeanor. The lawyer had a rehearsed smile, but the tension I felt in the air was palpable. Vincent was starting to pressure not only the authorities of our department, but also the systems that governed the city. When he entered, I realized that he wasn't just there to adopt. He wanted to gain everyone's approval. He wanted us to believe that he was a man above suspicion, a man who could do whatever he wanted, simply because he had the power to do so. Dorothy, Helen, Vincent began, with that authoritative tone he always used. I brought the best lawyer from Portland to discuss Emma's adoption process. We are treating this as a priority, and I believe we can speed up the entire process if we have your cooperation. That word, cooperation, made me swallow hard. It was as if he was telling us there was no room for refusal, that there was no choice. He wanted Emma, and nothing would stop him. He had taken control of the situation in such a way that not even our supervision could slow down the process. But there was something in his voice, something in the words he used, that made me feel increasingly uncomfortable. It wasn't just about Emma. It wasn't about the adoption. He was taking advantage of the power and wealth he had to manipulate everything around him, as if it were a simple board game. And that, for some reason, affected me more strongly than I would like to admit. Vincent, we need to follow standard procedures, Helen said, trying to maintain her calm and composure. But I could see the tension in her eyes, the concern that he didn't seem willing to accept a no for an answer. Adoptions are not quick processes, and as you know, we have to go through rigorous checks. I understand the legal requirements, he replied, waving his hand as if the bureaucratic process was trivial to him. But as I mentioned, money is not an issue. I can pay for anything that needs to be done. I will do everything necessary to ensure Emma has the future she deserves. I could feel my stomach churning. The way he spoke, with such certainty and impersonality, gave me the feeling that he was treating a child's life as a business, something to be conquered, something to be obtained. It wasn't an adoption, it was a transaction. When he left the office, after another meeting where he controlled every word, every movement, I let out a sigh of relief. But the feeling of discomfort didn't go away. On the contrary, it grew. In the following days, I started to wonder why Vincent was so obsessed with Emma. He had never shown interest in children before, not even in adoption, until that moment. So, why now? And why Emma specifically? It was hard to believe that someone with so much power and influence had a true connection with an orphaned girl. But there was something more, something he was trying to hide. I knew he had made a significant donation to St. Mary's Orphanage, but that didn't explain the obsessive behavior. The truth was, I needed to know more about Vincent Hartwell, more about what connected him to Emma. Something told me there was something there, a connection he didn't want discovered. And as I had done for so many years at work, I decided to investigate. I started looking for information about Vincent's past, searching for any clue that could clarify his obsession with Emma. I discreetly asked colleagues about him, and little by little, I started putting pieces together. There were rumors about his past, but nothing concrete. A suspicious involvement with a young woman who disappeared from town years ago. But it had never been confirmed. This made me uneasy. Who was this woman? Could she have something to do with Emma? How did he get involved with her? I knew I had to investigate further, so I looked for any public information about Vincent's life before his rise to power in Cedar Falls. I went to the city library, where I found some old articles about the construction of his company. But what caught my attention most was a newspaper article that talked about the death of a young woman named Isabella, more than 10 years ago. Isabella Maria Santos. She had worked as a domestic helper for the Hartwells at the time Vincent was establishing himself in the city. The article said she died during the birth of her daughter, a newborn baby who, according to the article, had been placed in an orphanage, St. Mary's Orphanage. My heart pounded. It couldn't be a coincidence. That name, that orphanage, was the same place where Emma was. I was starting to understand what was happening. Vincent Hartwell was trying to adopt Emma because somehow he knew who she was. She was Isabella's daughter. She was his biological daughter. I knew I had to confront Vincent. I couldn't ignore the truth anymore, even if it was hard to swallow. When I found the information about Isabella, Vincent's story, everything started to make sense. He knew, and he had put himself on the path to correct what he considered a past mistake. However, the fear of how he would react to being confronted made me hesitate. He was a powerful man, and I knew the consequences could be severe. But at the same time, I couldn't let this continue. Emma deserved to know the truth. She deserved to understand who she really was and what was happening. The idea that she would be manipulated by Vincent without knowing the true connection between them kept me awake for nights. The next morning, with a heavy heart, I sought out Helen. She was one of the few people I truly trusted, and I knew she would understand the gravity of the situation. "Helen," I began, my voice trembling. "I found something about Vincent Hartwell. He's not just interested in adopting Emma. He's her biological father. She's Isabella Santos's daughter." Helen looked at me, completely surprised, before whispering, This changes everything, Dorothy." Helen looked at me, completely surprised, before whispering, This changes everything, Dorothy." "I know," I replied, my throat tight. "We need to act fast. I don't know what Vincent plans, but he's hiding something. And now we have to tell Emma the truth before it's too late." The feeling that something was about to change stayed with me all night. I couldn't sleep. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fit together, and, as more information emerged, the truth became clearer and clearer, and more frightening. Vincent Hartwell, the man who had presented himself as Emma's savior, the man who seemed to have everything he desired, was, in reality, hiding a dark secret. He wasn't just helping an orphaned child. He was trying to redeem himself from a much deeper mistake. Emma wasn't just a girl he wanted to adopt. She was his daughter, the daughter of a young domestic helper named Isabella Santos, who mysteriously disappeared from town years earlier and who died during Emma's birth. The girl he was now trying to bring into his home, into his life, was the reflection of a guilt he had carried for a long time. I didn't know how to deal with it. I didn't know how to confront Vincent, or worse, how to tell Emma the truth. The pain in his eyes when he talked about her, the way he tried to hide his own despair, left me speechless. He knew he couldn't continue with this lie, but at the same time, there was something so possessive about him, something that made me doubt his true intentions. He wanted Emma, but why? The decision to tell Emma the truth was not easy. I knew she would need time to process everything, but something told me that leaving her in ignorance was not the answer. The girl deserved to know who she really was, what had happened to her mother, and why Vincent Hartwell was so obsessed with her. That morning, right after discovering the connection between Vincent and Emma, I called Helen. I knew she would be the only person who would understand the gravity of what was happening. We couldn't let this continue. Helen, we need to talk about Vincent, I began, my voice trembling. I found out who Emma is. She's not just an orphan he wants to adopt. She's his daughter. He never told us the truth. He's Emma's biological father. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I knew Helen was processing the information. Finally, she replied, her voice firm, but with a clear doubt. Are you sure, Dorothy? This changes everything. We need to act cautiously. We can't just confront him without more proof. Emma needs to know, of course, but we also need an approach that protects her from more pain. I knew she was right. Emma was an 8-year-old child, and even if she was strong and intelligent, we couldn't underestimate the impact of such a revelation. She had just started to adapt to her new life, and now we would have to tell her that the family she thought she had, perhaps, was built on lies and secrets. That afternoon, after talking to Helen, I went to St. Mary's Orphanage. I needed to see Emma. I needed to understand how she was dealing with the situation. When I arrived, Sister Catherine greeted me, her expression always gentle, but I could see the concern in her eyes. Dorothy, you came to talk to Emma, didn't you? She asked, with a worried tone. Yes, I replied, forcing a smile. I need to know how she's doing, how she's dealing with the change and the idea of being adopted. Sister Catherine led me to the courtyard, where Emma was playing alone, looking at a children's storybook. When she looked up and saw me, her lips curved into a small smile, but there was something in her eyes, a doubt, a curiosity that made me feel a weight in my chest. She was starting to realize that things weren't as simple as they seemed. Hello, Emma, I said, sitting next to her on the bench. How are you, dear? Hello, Emma, I said, sitting next to her on the bench. How are you, dear? She slowly closed the book, her expression calm, but with a fragility I had never noticed before. I'm fine. I was reading a book about a prince who rescued a princess. He took her to live in a castle and said she would never have to worry about anything again. That sounds like a fairy tale, doesn't it? I commented, trying to lighten the conversation, but I knew I couldn't stray too far from it. Are you excited about the upcoming change, about your new family? Emma hesitated for a moment. Then, with the same seriousness I had seen in her before, she said, I don't know, Dorothy. Vincent has been very good to me, but he looks at me in a strange way, as if he knows something I don't. And when he talks about my mother, he gets sad. I don't understand. I didn't know what to answer. How could I explain to her that this man, who seemed so generous, was actually a man fleeing a dark past, a past he had tried to hide even from himself, a past that involved his own daughter, Emma, and the woman with whom he had had a brief but tragic involvement. I knew that now was the time to tell her the truth. I couldn't put it off any longer. Emma, I began, feeling my heart tighten. There's something you need to know about your story, something you may have already felt, but didn't know how to understand. She looked at me, her eyes shining with the curiosity and pain she tried to hide. What is it, Dorothy? I know you've been wondering what happened to your mother, I continued, feeling the pain tighten in my throat. Emma, I found out that you're not just a girl who was put up for adoption. You are Vincent Hartwell's daughter. He is your biological father. The words came out like a weight from my mouth, and for a moment, silence filled the room. Emma looked at me in shock, unable to say anything. I saw the confusion, the pain, and then slowly she spoke. This can't be true. Vincent, he's my father? Yes, dear, I replied, my heart aching. Vincent is your father, and there's more you need to know. Your mother, Isabella, was a young woman who worked for him, but when she found out she was pregnant with you, he abandoned her. She died during childbirth, and you were placed in the orphanage with no one to care for you. Emma didn't say a word. She stood there, in silence, her eyes fixed on the floor. I could see the internal struggle happening within her, but I didn't know how to ease the pain she felt. But he loves me, Dorothy, she finally said, her voice almost inaudible. He brought me toys, gave me everything I wanted. He said he loved me. Yes, he loves you, I replied, feeling the words come out with pain. But this love is complicated, Emma. He did things I can't justify. He loves you, but he also hid the truth. He didn't know how to deal with what happened in the past, and now he wants to correct his mistake. But what he did to your mother cannot be erased. She slowly stood up, walking to the window. I don't know what to do with this, Dorothy. I don't know what all this means. I stood up and went to her, placing a hand on her shoulder. I know it's very difficult, dear, but you're not alone, and now you have the right to know the truth. After the conversation with Emma, I knew nothing would be the same. How could she deal with such a big, devastating revelation? An 8-year-old girl who had barely adapted to her new life now had to confront the truth that the man she considered her savior was, in reality, the man responsible for so much suffering. That afternoon, when Emma pulled away from me, with a lost look and a distant expression, I knew that the pain she felt was not just from the loss of her mother, but from the loss of everything she thought she knew about her life. Vincent, that man so present in her life, the man she was now trying to understand, was no longer the hero of her story. He was a part of her past that she had never known existed, a shadow that dragged behind everything she had built with him. I watched her for a long moment. She was sitting on the courtyard bench, her shoulders slumped and her eyes fixed on the horizon, as if searching for an answer that wouldn't come. All she wanted was to go back to the moment when everything seemed simple, when she had a family, even if it was an illusion. I took a deep breath, approaching slowly. Emma, are you okay? I took a deep breath, approaching slowly. Emma, are you okay? She didn't answer immediately. She stayed there in silence, her breathing a little heavier. Then, finally, she looked up at me, and in that look, I saw everything a child her age shouldn't carry. Confusion, fear, pain. She didn't speak, but her face said it all. Dorothy, I don't know what to do with all this, she said with a choked voice. I didn't know that Vincent was my father. I never knew that. How can I deal with this? How can I look at him and still call him Dad? I sat beside her, feeling the pain she carried. Emma, you don't need to do anything immediately. You don't need to have all the answers now. What you feel is completely valid. You just discovered something very big, something that changes the way you see your life, and that's difficult. She slowly shook her head. But what about him? What do I do with him? He's treating me as if nothing happened, as if it's easy for me to accept everything he did. He brought me to his house, gave me toys, good things, but he never told me the truth, never told me he was my father. And now, everything he did seems wrong. How can I trust him? How can I call him Dad? I looked at her, trying to find the right words. I knew what she felt. What Vincent had done could not be erased. He had erred in a way that could not be justified. But the pain he had caused Emma should not define who she was either. I knew she needed time to digest all of it, to accept or reject the truth. But most importantly, she needed to know that she wasn't alone, that she didn't have to face this alone. Emma, you are not alone, I said, gently touching her hand. You can feel whatever you want to feel. There's no right way to react. There's no right way to love someone who hurt you. And if you don't want to call him Dad, that's perfectly fine. You have the right to decide how you feel, and there's no problem at all in changing your mind as the truth unfolds. She looked at me, her eyes clearer now, as if a deep understanding was beginning to form in her mind. She seemed calmer, but the internal struggle was still there. And you, Dorothy, how can you be so calm? You know what he did. Don't you feel hurt? I didn't know what to answer immediately. The truth was, I also felt angry at Vincent. He had manipulated everyone around him, playing with a child's life as if it were a chess piece. But at the same time, I knew there was something more behind it all, something he didn't want anyone to know, something he was trying to hide even from himself. But Emma didn't need to know everything now. She needed time to find her way. I knew the truth would be a heavy burden for her, but I also knew that, in the end, it would be the only thing that would set her free. Emma, I care about you, I said, trying to control the emotion in my voice. And that's why I'm here, to help you find the answers, even when things get difficult. I know you feel lost, but you have more strength than you imagine, and you won't face this alone. She looked at me with a small smile, still cautious, but with a look that reflected more confidence than before. "I don't know what I'm going to do, but thank you for being here, Dorothy. I really don't know what I'd do without you." Those words touched me deeply. Emma was beginning to understand that, despite the pain, she still had control over her life. She didn't have to accept everything immediately. She didn't have to conform to what others expected of her. She was a child, but she had a wisdom that I was only beginning to understand. I wanted to protect that wisdom. I wanted her to feel free to choose what was best for her. But at the same time, I knew that Vincent's story, the secret about Isabella, and the weight of his own paternity were yet to be revealed. There was more, and the more I tried to understand Vincent's motivations, the more I got lost in a tangle of lies and regrets. How would he react when he knew I knew the truth? How would he deal with the pain of knowing that his daughter, the girl he wanted to save, now saw him as a stranger? The next day, Vincent reappeared at the orphanage. He was no longer just trying to speed up the adoption process. He seemed more uncomfortable, more tense. He knew the game was changing. The mask he wore was starting to crack, and he didn't know how to hide it from me. He didn't know how to hide the guilt that, even in such a powerful man, was there for all to see. He entered the office with the same imposing posture, but his eyes, usually so self-assured, were now filled with something more: uncertainty, fear. I knew he was trying to keep up appearances, but the pressure was starting to show. He knew that sooner or later, someone would discover everything, and that person was me. "Dorothy," he began, his voice soft, but with a tone I knew well, the tone of someone who knew he was losing control. "I'd like to talk to you about Emma's adoption. I know we've had some difficulties with the process, but I need you to understand that I'm doing this for her sake. She needs a family, and I'm willing to give her everything she needs." I looked him directly in the eyes. "Do you know what you're doing, Vincent? Do you know what you're doing to this girl? It's not just about giving toys and comfort. She needs something more than that. She needs a truth you're refusing to tell." He seemed to collapse before my words. His rigid body now seemed more fragile, and for a brief moment I saw a completely different man from the one I had known. I knew that, deep down, he was regretful, but that didn't change the fact that he had lied. He had manipulated everyone around him, and not only that, he had stolen Emma's childhood. "Dorothy, I know I made a mistake. I know I wasn't the man I should have been, but I'm trying to correct things, and all I'm asking for is a chance to be her father. Do you think you can correct this with a chance, Vincent? Do you think you can correct years of lies and abandonment with a simple gesture? That's not how it works." I didn't know if he was listening or if he was just sinking deeper into his guilt. But one thing was clear: the lies he had lived and that he was trying to maintain were about to explode. The days following my conversation with Emma and Vincent seemed like an eternity. The words I had said to her still echoed in my mind, as did the weight of the responsibility I felt regarding everything that was happening. I knew I couldn't solve things immediately. That time and reflection were necessary, but the pain on Emma's face, the confusion, assailed me every passing moment. How could she accept this? How could she accept a man who, before, seemed to be her hero, now as the one responsible for a life of lies and abandonment? Vincent, on the other hand, was increasingly tense. He spent hours in our office, talking about the details of the adoption, trying to appear calm and controlled. But I could see in his eyes that he was desperate. He didn't want to lose Emma, not just because he loved her, but because Emma represented the opportunity to redeem himself, to correct a terrible mistake he had made. And that pain, that guilt, he didn't know how to deal with it. I knew what he was trying to do. He was desperately trying to redeem himself, trying to convince everyone that he was the right man to be Emma's father. But more than that, he was trying to fix something that couldn't be fixed merely with gestures of generosity or donations. The mistake was in his essence, in everything he had done, and Emma knew it. When he appeared at the orphanage again, I was already waiting for him. The words he had said to me in our last conversation were still fresh in my memory. He wanted to correct what he had done, but I knew he could never erase what had happened between him and Isabella. And now Emma, his biological daughter, was the last person he had to redeem himself with. He was no longer just trying to adopt a child. He wanted to erase his own past. "Dorothy," he began, entering my office with that closed expression. "I know you're concerned about Emma's reaction, about what happened in the past, but I need you to understand one thing. I'm not doing this just for myself. I'm doing this for her. She deserves a better life, and I can provide that for her. I looked at him, trying to control what I felt. He still believed he could fix everything with his resources and his presence, but that was an illusion. How could he fix the fact that he abandoned Emma's mother? How could he erase the years she was raised without knowing who he really was? Vincent, you don't understand, I said, my voice firmer than I wanted. Emma doesn't need a perfect life. She needs a life where she can grow up knowing who she is, where she came from. And you can't erase the past. You can't just do whatever you want because you have money and power. The truth will always find a way. He looked at me, his eyes narrowing. But this time, there was no longer that controlling look he used to have. There was something more fragile, something he didn't want anyone to see. But I saw it. I know I made a mistake, Dorothy, he said, his voice faltering for the first time. I know I can't erase what I did. I can't go back. But all I'm trying to do now is fix it. I just want to do the right thing for her. I love her. I feel like I have a chance to make things right. I didn't know how to respond to that. Vincent's love for Emma was not a common love. It wasn't the love of a father who spent years raising a child, giving her affection and care. It was a love driven by guilt, by the desire to redeem himself. He wanted to do whatever was necessary to alleviate the pain he felt, but that didn't change what he had done. I took a deep breath, trying to phrase my words so as not to hurt the situation even more. You can't fix this with a gift, Vincent. It won't be that simple. Emma won't just forget what you did. She'll need time to understand it, and you need to be honest with her, no matter how much it hurts. He remained silent for a long moment, as if trying to process my words. But then, he spoke, with a sigh that seemed to come from deep within his soul. Do you think I don't know that? Do you think I don't know what I did to my own daughter? But I didn't know what else to do, Dorothy. I made a terrible mistake, and now, I just want to try to be a father to her. I want to do this right. I looked at him for a moment. There was regret in his eyes. There was something sincere there, but there was also an internal struggle, something I didn't know if he himself fully understood. He wasn't asking for forgiveness. He was trying to justify himself. And deep down, I knew he needed to find a way to forgive himself before expecting Emma to forgive him. When night fell, I decided I needed to talk to Emma again. I knew that her process of understanding the situation was just beginning, but she needed to know that she wasn't alone. No matter what happened, she had to feel that there was someone who understood her, someone who wouldn't try to hide the truth, no matter how painful it was. I went to the courtyard where she was sitting, looking at the stars. She no longer seemed like that girl full of doubts and fears I had seen in the first days of her arrival at the orphanage. Now she was quiet, introspective, but there was a silent strength in her that surprised me every moment. Emma? I called softly. She looked up and smiled, but that smile was no longer the same. It was a sad smile, full of understanding, as if she already knew that things would never be the same again. I know what you're going to say, she began, her voice low and distant. You're going to tell me I'm not a princess, that I won't live in a castle, that the story I wanted for myself isn't real. I sat beside her, feeling the weight of the words she had just said. She was right. Her life wouldn't be a fairy tale, and I couldn't promise her a happy ending. Not that way. Emma, you don't have to live in a castle to be happy, I said, gently placing my hand on hers. You don't need a perfect story. You just need the truth. And when you have that truth, you can create your own story. I'll be here to support you in everything you need. She looked at me, her eyes still full of sadness, but now there was something more. Hope. She wanted to believe that there was something more beyond the pain and disappointment. And perhaps, looking at her, I knew that there was, in fact, something more. Something that didn't depend on Vincent, nor on the past, nor on any mistake he had made. In the days that followed, I knew I couldn't continue allowing Vincent to play this game of control. Emma's life was not a chessboard, and he couldn't do whatever he wanted without considering the consequences. When Vincent sought me out again, he was more tired, more dejected, but I knew what he wanted. He wanted me to believe in his good intentions. He wanted me to support him, to help him win Emma over. But the truth was, he didn't need more approval. He needed to understand that true redemption didn't come from apologizing or buying Emma's affection. She needed to see the change in his actions, not in his words. Dorothy, please, tell me you still believe I can be her father, he said, his voice hoarse with a pain I knew he carried. "Tell me it's not too late." I looked at him, realizing for the first time that somehow he was still a broken man. But that didn't mean I should allow him to continue manipulating the situation. Emma wouldn't be a solution to his mistakes. "Vincent, the change you need to make is not something I can help you achieve. That's something you need to do alone." Emma no longer needs a man who tries to fix everything with promises. She needs someone who, above all, is true to her. He said nothing more. He just looked at me, perhaps for the first time in many years, aware that the words I had spoken were not just advice, they were the truth. Time seemed to drag with the same slowness with which words left Vincent's mouth. I knew he was trying to find a way to correct his mistakes, but he was still stuck in the past, fighting against something that could not be fixed with promises and gestures. The truth was lurking, waiting for the right moment to explode, and I knew that when that happened, there would be no turning back. I looked at Emma, who was beginning to deal with her new reality in a way that surprised me every day. She was starting to accept who she was, even if the pieces of her life were so messy. She had closed herself off a bit from Vincent, and her resistance was visible. He tried to approach her, but his own guilt and the secrets he still carried seemed to be building a wall between them. Emma still viewed him with suspicion, and it was hard to blame her. She was in a phase of discovery, not only about who she was, but about who she wanted to be. The loss of her mother, the discovery that the man she thought was a hero was, in fact, the man who had left her behind. All of this created an internal confusion that no child should have to deal with so early. Emma was only 8 years old, but her wisdom and her perception of the world left me speechless. She was already beginning to understand that the pain of betrayal was not something that could simply be erased with time. She needed answers, not just promises. Vincent began to avoid talking about the past. At every meeting, every conversation, he seemed to shy away from any mention of Emma's mother. He knew that past was a thorn in his side, and the more he tried to push it away, the more unsustainable the present became. It was then that something unexpected happened. During one of my visits to the orphanage, Sister Catherine sought me out, with an expression I could only describe as worried. She seemed more agitated than usual, as if there was something she wanted to tell me, but didn't know how. "Dorothy, I need to talk to you about Vincent," she began, her voice low. "I know you've been worried about him and Emma's situation, but there are things you need to know." I stared at her, curious and apprehensive. "What's going on, Sister Catherine?" She led me to her office, where the lights were dim, creating an atmosphere of secrecy. "Vincent, he sought me out again. Not directly, but through someone close to him. He wants to know more about Isabella. The truth, Dorothy. He wants to know everything about Emma's mother. But here's the problem. He's asking as if he knows nothing, as if he really forgot what happened." I felt a shiver run down my spine. That doesn't make sense. He knows who Emma is. He knows who she is to him. Sister Catherine nodded, but with a look of sadness. "Exactly. He knows, but he's trying to pretend he doesn't. He's trying to hide it from himself, and that's hurting Emma more than he imagines. He's running from the truth. He knows that if he fully confronts what he did, he might not be able to live with it." I felt a growing anguish inside me. "Are you telling me he still hasn't confronted what happened to Isabella? He's trying to erase his own history?" "Yes, Dorothy, and that's dangerous. He's trying to maintain the appearance of a man who, deep down, knows he no longer is, and that won't help Emma. She needs the truth, and the truth about her mother is a fundamental part of who she is." I knew Sister Catherine was right. Emma couldn't continue living with this lie, couldn't continue being manipulated by someone who was hiding behind his own guilt. I knew I had to act. Vincent could no longer hide from the past, and for Emma to move forward, she needed to know the complete truth. The next morning, I went to meet Vincent. He didn't know what was coming. I invited him for a conversation, and when he entered my room, his posture was stiffer than usual. He was prepared to defend his cause, to convince me that what he was doing was best for Emma. But I knew there was something more behind it. I knew he couldn't keep running from the truth. "Vincent, we need to talk about Isabella," I began, without beating around the bush. "You can't run from this anymore. You can't run from what happened." He looked at me, his eyes narrowing with discomfort. But there was something else there too, a silent anger, a frustration at not being able to control the situation as he used to. "Dorothy, I've already talked about this. I've done what I could to make things right. I know what I did, but please leave me alone with this. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. You can't ask to be left alone, Vincent. You have a daughter who deserves to know the truth. She deserves to know who her mother was. And more importantly, she deserves to know that you left her behind, even knowing what was happening. You can't keep hiding this. You can't keep trying to erase what you did. He seemed to struggle against my words, but he knew he was losing control. He knew he couldn't run from the truth anymore. I did what I did because I was scared. I was scared of losing everything, Dorothy. I was scared of losing Evelyn, of losing my perfect life. Isabella was a young woman, and I didn't know what to do with her. I didn't know what to do with what happened. That's no excuse, Vincent, I said, my voice growing firmer. You chose the path of lies. You chose to hide the truth. And now, you have a daughter who needs you. But you can't be her father until you face what you did. You need to stop hiding and take responsibility. He was starting to understand. The anger that once dominated his eyes was beginning to dissipate, replaced by sadness and guilt. I know, he murmured. I know I did everything wrong. But what can I do now? What can I do to fix it? I looked at him, seeing for the first time the man he was, not the man he wanted to be. Now, Vincent, all you can do is be honest, not with yourself, not with your wife, but with Emma. She needs to know who you really are, what you did, and what you're trying to do now. And only then will you have a chance to be the father she needs. In the days that followed our confrontation, I felt as if a wave had broken over us. Vincent was more distant, and Emma, despite her resistance, was beginning to process the magnitude of the revelation. What worried me most, however, was the void that was forming between them. Vincent seemed lost, as if guilt had paralyzed him. He was desperately trying to show Emma that he could be a father, but what he didn't understand was that it wasn't enough to simply be present now. He had failed, and the trust Emma had in him was slowly disintegrating. Each day, she closed herself off more, and the worst part was that she didn't tell me what she was really feeling. I knew she was constantly wondering if any part of Vincent truly loved her, and deep down, I knew she didn't know how to deal with that pain. An 8-year-old child shouldn't carry that burden. She should be playing, running through fields, exploring the world. But Emma was trapped in a whirlwind of emotions, and all I could do was be by her side, hoping she would find a way to deal with it. I remember one night, a few days later, when I found Emma in her room, sitting by the window, watching the stars. She seemed so small, so fragile, lost in her own thoughts. I knew she was struggling with the pain, with the questions that couldn't be answered. I went to her, sitting silently beside her. I knew she wanted to talk, but she was afraid to ask what she already knew. She was afraid of the answer because, deep down, she already knew what was happening between her and Vincent. She just didn't want to accept it. Emma, I said, my voice soft, do you want to talk about what you're feeling? She looked at me, and the sadness in her eyes cut my heart. I don't know what to do, Dorothy. I feel so lost. I don't know if I can trust Vincent. He tells me he loves me, but he hid the truth from me for so long. And I don't know if I can forgive him. I sighed deeply, knowing that her words were more than just a doubt. It was an internal struggle, a battle between the child she wanted to be and the pain of knowing who she really was. She wanted to believe that the person who adopted her was the same one who loved her unconditionally, but the lies had ruined everything. And the hardest part was that Vincent didn't know how to ask for her forgiveness. Emma, I said, taking her hand, no one is saying this is easy. No one is saying you have to forgive him now, or that you should know exactly how you feel. What you need is time, and above all, you need to be honest with yourself about what you want, what you feel. She looked at me, her eyes still full of doubts. But what if I can't forgive him, Dorothy? What if I can never understand why he did what he did? And what if, deep down, I don't love him anymore? I looked at her, knowing that the answer was not something I could simply offer in words. Emma, forgiveness is something very personal. It's not something you do for someone else, but for yourself. Don't feel pressured to forgive him, but also don't let resentment consume you. And above all, know that no matter what happens, you will always have a place here with me. I will be by your side for as long as it takes. She smiled slightly, still uncertain, but calmer. I knew I didn't have all the answers, but the truth is we don't always have them. Sometimes, the most important thing is to be present, to be a support, even when we can't take away the pain. Vincent, for his part, seemed more distant than ever. He was acting as if he was in control, trying to manipulate the situation so that Emma would accept him back without question. He didn't understand what was happening to her, didn't see how his guilt was eroding Emma's trust. He didn't see that, for her to accept him, he needed more than gestures of affection. He needed to be honest. He needed to take responsibility for his actions. But instead, he kept trying to be the hero of the story, trying to convince himself that the perfection of his previous life could be restored if he simply adopted the girl and continued as if nothing had happened. It was during one of these visits when Vincent approached me once again, trying to maintain his usual facade, that the truth about his manipulation began to become evident. He was so desperate for forgiveness that he no longer knew how to act. "Dorothy," he began, his voice full of tension, "we need to talk about Emma. She's not accepting the adoption as I expected, and I need you to help her understand that everything I'm doing is for her good. I know you understand that." I looked at him, anger beginning to form inside me, but I held back. I couldn't allow him to manipulate me anymore. Not this time. "Vincent, you don't understand, do you? It's not about what you want. It's not about what you think is best for her. This is about Emma, and she needs space, not pressure. She can't be forced to accept you as a father if she still can't trust you." He tried to interrupt me, but I was firm. "And you won't be able to fix everything with superficial gestures. You need to be honest with her, Vincent, and with yourself." I saw the frustration grow in his eyes, and then for the first time, he looked at me with a mixture of despair and confusion. He was lost. He knew he couldn't go back, but he also didn't know how to deal with reality. And deep down, he knew that this was what he had done to Emma. He had lied to her, hidden the truth, and now he was trying to find a quick solution. But nothing he did now could erase what happened, and he knew that. I knew Emma was starting to process everything differently. She was no longer the naive girl who believed that everything could be fixed with gestures of affection and expensive toys. She was understanding that people are complicated, that even those we love can fail us. But there was something deeper in her understanding. She was beginning to understand that forgiveness was not something you could simply offer without accepting the weight of your own pain. I saw her that night, lying in her bed, with her eyes closed, but with a distant expression. She was dealing with it on her own, trying to understand her own identity amidst all of it. She knew who Vincent was now, knew what he had done, but she also knew that this didn't mean she had to accept him automatically. She didn't have to choose to forgive him immediately. She didn't have to decide now. She needed time. She looked at me when I entered the room, a deep look, as if she was asking me to understand what she couldn't put into words. "Dorothy," she said softly, "I don't know what to do. I don't know if I can call him Dad." I sat beside her, placing my hand over hers, trying to offer some comfort. "Emma, you don't need to decide now. You will find your own way. What you feel is valid, and you can change your mind when you feel it's the right time." She nodded, but I knew she didn't have all the answers. And perhaps that was what hurt me the most. She shouldn't be facing this pain. She should be wondering what her next game or book to read would be. But life wasn't like that. Life was more complicated, and I could only hope she would find a way to deal with it. The air in the orphanage was heavy, as if the entire weight of what was happening around Emma was breathed by each of us. Vincent, who once had an imposing and confident presence, was now more tense than ever. I saw him approach Emma, desperately trying to redeem himself, but what he didn't see was that the process of redemption didn't begin with material actions, like toys or financial comfort. He needed to rebuild something more complex, trust, and trust couldn't be bought. That day, after weeks of frustrated attempts, Vincent appeared at the orphanage again. He was with Evelyn, his wife, who seemed tense, with restless eyes, but making the effort to maintain a calm expression. The stage was already set. He wasn't just there to talk about Emma's adoption. He was there to try once again to control the situation, masking what really needed to be done, facing the truth. Not just the truth of his paternity, but the truth about what he had done to Isabella. Evelyn, who I knew was as lost as all of us, remained silent throughout the visit. She seemed worn out, as if she knew that, no matter how hard she tried, there was no longer any way to save the situation. There was no longer any way to hide what was between the lines. The truth was beginning to corrode everything. Vincent, however, didn't seem willing to admit it. He still had that look that deeply bothered me. A look of someone trying to control the world around him with a simple gesture, with a simple smile. But I knew he was starting to realize that what he had built with his wealth and power could not save himself or Emma. Not anymore. "Dorothy," Vincent began, his voice grave and hesitant. "I know you have your concerns, and I know you're worried about Emma, but we're doing our best. Evelyn and I are doing our best to help her get through all of this." I looked him directly in the eyes, feeling that I could no longer remain calm. "Vincent," I began with a firm voice, "you don't understand, do you? We're not talking about helping. We're talking about the truth. Emma won't get through all of this until you face the truth." He looked away, clearly uncomfortable. I knew he wasn't prepared for this, that he was still hiding behind his mask of power, but he had nowhere left to hide. Emma knew what had happened. She no longer saw Vincent as a hero. She saw the man who had left her behind, the man who was unable to protect her mother, the man who, now, was trying to use his guilt to turn her life into a farce, and she was starting to pull away from him. I realized that, even if Vincent was there to convince everyone that he was doing everything right, he knew that the real struggle was within him. He didn't know how to deal with the guilt he carried. He didn't know how to deal with the fact that Emma couldn't be fixed with expensive gifts or empty promises. That night was difficult. I knew Emma was dealing with something profound, something she couldn't yet fully understand. When I went to visit her, she was sitting on the bed, looking out the window, her eyes lost somewhere distant. When she saw me, her face briefly lit up, but soon returned to that expression of doubt and fear that had accompanied her in recent days. "Dorothy," she began, her voice almost a whisper, "I don't know what to do. I don't know how to look at Vincent and not feel angry, but I also don't know how to let him go. He's my father, isn't he? He adopted me." I sat beside her, feeling the weight of the question. How could I explain that, besides being Emma's biological father, Vincent had also caused her mother's pain? That the relationship between them was stained by something darker, deeper than any love or bond? I knew she had to understand all of this, but it wasn't simple. "Emma," I began, my voice trembling but firm. "Yes, he is your biological father, but you don't have to call him father just because he adopted you. There are no rules for that. What you feel is what matters. And if you can't trust him, if you can't forgive him now, that's fine. There's no rush. You have the right to feel what you feel." She looked at me, her eyes still full of doubt. "But what if I can never forgive him? What if everything he did is so wrong that I can never look at him without seeing the pain of him abandoning me?" I sighed, feeling the pain in her words, the pain of a child who, above all, just wanted to be loved and protected. "Emma, forgiveness is a personal choice. It's not something you have to give out of obligation. You can feel anger, sadness, frustration, and eventually you will discover what that means for you. Don't be rushed. Don't be in a hurry to accept or forgive. The truth will show you the way." The next day, I knew I needed to make a decision. Vincent had become a shadow over Emma's life, and I knew he was starting to realize that no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't force anyone to forgive him. Emma would not be a victim of his manipulations. She deserved to be more than just a piece of his quest for redemption. When Vincent arrived at the orphanage that afternoon, he looked more serious than ever. I knew he was preparing for one last attempt to convince everyone that he was in control. He wanted me to believe that he was doing what was best for Emma, but he didn't understand. He didn't know what Emma really needed. "Dorothy," he began, his shoulders tense, "I know you have your reservations, but you need to understand that I'm doing this for her sake. I just want her to have the life she deserves." I looked at him, no longer having patience for his empty words. "You still don't understand, Vincent. It's not about what you want. It's not about what you think is best for her. Emma needs time. She needs to understand who you are. And no matter how much you try to redeem yourself, the truth is, you can't escape it. You can't erase what you did." He stared at me, and I saw for the first time the real struggle in his eyes. He knew he was lost. He knew that no matter what he did, the truth about his paternity and the mistakes of the past could not be erased. The days following our last conversation were like an abyss opening before us. Emma was quieter, more introspective, but there was a growing strength in her that I was beginning to see more clearly. She was starting to understand that the truth, however painful, was the only way to find peace, and that gave me a little hope. The truth had the power to free her, even if she didn't yet know how to deal with it. Vincent, on the other hand, was sinking deeper and deeper into his own guilt. He was trying to be the father Emma needed, but with each attempt, I saw the frustration grow on his face. He was trying to fix something that could no longer be fixed. It wasn't enough to buy Emma's affection with expensive toys or sweet words. She knew he had abandoned her, knew he had left her behind, and that he was now just trying to do what he thought was right, without realizing that, deep down, what he really wanted was absolution for his own mistakes. The situation became untenable. I knew I needed to intervene somehow. I knew Emma wouldn't be able to heal on her own, and that Vincent still hadn't realized that true redemption didn't come from actions, but from facing the truth and allowing the other person to make their own decisions. And that was what he didn't understand. He was treating Emma like an object, something he could fix or replace. But Emma wasn't a correction. She was a child with feelings, with pain, with her own story. And she didn't need a man who wanted to erase everything that had happened. She needed someone who would help her understand her own story, who would help her find her own identity. The next morning, I went to Emma's room. She was sitting by the window, as she always did when she wanted to be alone with her thoughts. Her expression was distant, and I knew she was pondering what had been said. Emma was trying to process everything, but I knew she was still lost. And more than anything, she didn't know how to deal with the man who had left her behind, and, at the same time, was now trying to be her father. "Emma," I began, approaching her, "I know you're confused, and I know you're trying to understand everything that happened. But the truth, dear, is that you don't need to make decisions now. You don't need to give answers. You need time." She looked at me, her eyes wide and sad, and for a moment I felt such a heavy weight in my chest that I almost couldn't breathe. "I don't know what to do, Dorothy. I can't look at Vincent and not feel angry, but at the same time, I feel so sad for him. He's my father. I should feel something for him, but I don't know what it is. He hurt me so much, but also, he gave me everything I wanted." I sat beside her, gently touching her hand. "Emma, you don't have to feel anything you don't want to feel. You don't have to rush into deciding what's right or wrong. You can feel anger, you can feel pain, you can feel anything. The important thing is that you are honest with yourself. It's okay not to know what to do. It's okay to feel confused. What matters is that you have the time you need to decide what's right for you." She looked at me, a deep and sad look. "I feel like I'm being forced to make decisions, to choose between him and my mother, between what he did and what she left me. But what if I can't forgive him? What if I don't know how to look at him without seeing everything he did? And what if, deep down, I can never trust him again?" "Emma, you don't have to forgive him now. You don't have to decide anything now. You have the right to feel what you feel. What you feel is important, and you don't have to swallow it all alone. Forgiveness comes when you are ready for it, not when someone expects you to do it. And that's something you have to discover for yourself." She took a deep breath, with a slight sigh, as if trying to find a way to understand my words. For a brief moment, she seemed a little calmer, but at the same time, I knew that her internal struggle was not over yet. The truth about Vincent, about the mother she never knew, was still weighing on her mind. While Emma tried to process her emotions, Vincent was in a frantic search to fix things without understanding that there was no fix. He couldn't restore Emma's trust with a smile or empty words. He was doing everything wrong, and that deeply bothered me. I saw him that afternoon, during one of his visits to the orphanage, trying to talk to Emma once more, but she was distant, almost resistant. She no longer saw in him the man she thought he was. She saw a man who was desperately trying to correct something that could no longer be corrected. He tried to approach her, trying to make her see how much he cared, how much he wanted to be her father. But all he was doing was making things worse. Emma didn't want that. She wanted the truth. No more empty promises. "Emma, you need to hear me," Vincent said, his voice faltering. "I know I made a mistake. I know I did terrible things, but all I'm doing now is trying to correct what happened. I can't change the past, but I can be the father you need now." I saw Emma's gaze, and I saw how divided she was. She wanted to believe. She wanted him to be that father she imagined, that father she always wanted. But the truth was stronger than her desires. She knew he had abandoned her, knew he hadn't protected her when she needed him most. "I don't know what to do, Vincent," she said, her voice breaking, but without crying. "I don't know if I can forgive you. I don't know if I can trust you." Vincent tried to approach her, but what he didn't understand was that it wasn't about him winning her over with words or gifts. He couldn't do that to her. Not anymore. That night, I knew something had to change. Vincent was doing his best to convince everyone that he was a good man, a good father, but he wasn't listening. He wasn't listening to Emma, wasn't listening to her pain. And what he didn't understand was that if he truly loved her, he would have to give her the freedom to choose what she wanted without pressure. He could no longer force her to accept him, could no longer expect her to follow his script of perfection. He needed to allow her to find her own truth, just as he was trying to find his. I went to Emma's room that night and found her lying down, looking at the ceiling, lost in her own thoughts. She was silent, but I knew her mind was agitated. I knew she was struggling with the weight of the decision she was about to make. She was deciding whether or not she could forgive Vincent, but I knew that deep down, she didn't need to do that yet. She just needed time. "Emma, I know you're struggling," I began softly, "and I know you want to understand all of this, but the most important thing now is for you to know that you're not alone. You don't have to do this alone." She looked at me, her eyes shining with an understanding I hadn't seen before. "I know, Dorothy, but what do I do now? I don't know how to deal with all of this. I don't know if I can trust him." I looked at her with deep affection. "You have the right not to trust him, Emma, and you have the right to change your mind when you're ready. The most important thing is that you have time to feel what you need to feel." She gave me a small but genuine smile. "I know you're right. I just need time. That's all." Time, in the end, has a peculiar way of healing wounds, but also of intensifying doubts. Ever since the truth about Vincent and Emma came out, the air in the Hartwell house became denser. It was as if an invisible cloud hung over everyone, constantly reminding us of everything that was at stake. Emma, who until then had been an observant and sensitive child, was now beginning to become more introspective, more silent, as if she were absorbing every small decision made around her. Vincent was increasingly present, not because he wanted to be, but because he felt the pressure of time, of regret, and of guilt. He was trying to do what he thought was right, but in such a desperate and superficial way that it seemed more like he was trying to fix things with gestures and words, instead of accepting that rebuilding a real relationship would require more than that. He couldn't understand that he was not in a position to demand anything from Emma. She didn't owe him forgiveness. He was responsible for her pain, for her distrust, and now he was paying the price for it. I saw this clearly in the way he tried to approach Emma. He tried to be gentle, he tried to be affectionate, but she pushed him away more and more. Emma, with her keen perception, already knew that her trust could not be bought. And no matter how hard he tried, she was beginning to understand that perhaps it was better to go on alone, without clinging to the illusion of a father who, deep down, was never there when she really needed him. That afternoon, Vincent appeared at the orphanage again, once more trying to explain his side of the story, once more trying to justify the unjustifiable. He wanted to find a way to show Emma that he wasn't the villain, that, although he had made mistakes, he had changed. But with every word, he seemed more lost, more unsure of what he should say, of what he really wanted. "I know you don't understand me, Dorothy," Vincent began, with a tired expression. "I know you think I'm just trying to fix things for myself, but that's not it. I just want her to see me as the father she never had." I looked at him, once again seeing the struggle he was having with himself. He wanted absolution, but he didn't know how to achieve it. And worse, he didn't understand that the only person who could grant it to him was Emma, and she was far from ready to give him that. "Vincent," I began, my voice firm, "you're trying to force a relationship that doesn't exist yet. Emma owes you nothing. You abandoned her, and now she has the right to choose when or if she wants to accept you as a father. And you can't just expect her to forgive you because you're trying to do what you think is right. Forgiveness is something she'll need to find on her own, in her own time." He slowly shook his head, as if trying to understand what I was saying. But he knew, deep down, that I was right. He wasn't there to be the father Emma needed. He was there to try to fill a void in his own life, something that wouldn't be filled with gifts or excuses. "I know," he said with a deep sigh. "I know I made a mistake, but I don't know what else to do. I feel like I'm losing her, and I don't know how to get her back. I just want to fix what I did wrong." I knew what he wanted, but I couldn't help him. He didn't need to fix what he had done. He needed to accept the consequences, admit the truth, and give Emma the space to choose her own story. Later, that same night, I went to Emma's room. I knew she was dealing with her emotions in a quiet way, not telling me much about what she was feeling. But I also knew that she was starting to open up, starting to understand that although the pain was great, she didn't have to carry it alone. She needed to decide what was best for her, what would be fairest to her story. When I entered the room, she was sitting on the bed, her gaze fixed on the void. But when she saw me, she smiled a little, a sad smile, as if she was relieved to see someone who understood her. She didn't need anyone else at that moment besides me. "Dorothy," she began, her voice soft but laden with a sadness I couldn't ignore. "I don't know what to do. I don't know how to look at Vincent and not feel confused." I sat beside her, trying to be the support she so desperately needed, even though I myself was full of doubts. "Emma, you don't need to decide anything now. You don't need to choose between him and your mother, between what he did and what she left you. What you feel is legitimate. No matter how much time passes, you will discover your own path in your own way, and that can take as long as it needs." She sighed deeply, and I knew she was processing more than she let on. "I just wish things were different. I wish Vincent was the father he promised me, but I know I can't wait anymore. I can't expect him to be something he wasn't, and that hurts." I looked at her, my heart aching. "Emma, you no longer need to expect him to be something. You need to be who you are. And if that means you need space, time to understand what happened, then that's what you should do. There's no right or wrong here. There's only what you feel." She looked at me, and for the first time, I saw a decision beginning to form in her eyes. She didn't know exactly what the next step would be, but she knew that forgiveness, if it came, would not be forced. It would come from within her, in her own time, when she was ready. "I don't know if I'll be able to forgive him," she finally said, with a look that mixed sadness and acceptance. "But I know I don't need to do it now. I just need to understand all of this. You will, Emma, in your own way, in your own time. There's no rush. You will, Emma, in your own way, in your own time. There's no rush." The next day, when Vincent arrived at the orphanage, the feeling in the air was different. He knew Emma was distancing herself from him, and that was something he could no longer deny. He wanted to correct his actions, but the truth was that he was dealing with the pain of his own guilt, and that prevented him from acting sincerely. "Dorothy," he began, his voice even more tired than before, "I know you're trying to help me, but what else can I do? How can I make her understand? You can't force her anymore, Vincent. You need to give her the time and space to decide what she wants from you. And that's not something you can control. You can't fix what you did to her. You need to accept the consequences, however difficult they may be. Forgiveness, if it comes, will come from her, in her own time." He looked at me with an expression of pain and exhaustion, but deep down, he knew he could no longer hide from his own conscience what he had done. He knew that the price of truth was higher than he had imagined. It was as if the weight of the truth had finally begun to dissipate, but the pain of the consequences was still deeply etched within us. I knew that things wouldn't be easy from then on, but what mattered was that, finally, everyone was beginning to accept the realities they needed to face. I, somehow, began to see a light at the end of the tunnel. Not that it was an easy or instant solution. Healing never comes quickly, but at least there was a chance for a new beginning. Emma was calmer, but still dealing with what seemed like an internal storm. I knew she was still making her own discoveries about who she was and what she wanted from everyone around her. She had closed herself off for a while, and rightly so. She was beginning to understand that truth is a painful but necessary path, and now, more than ever, she needed space to heal her wounds. Vincent, on the other hand, was no longer trying to hide. He was beginning to understand the true extent of his actions, and, in a way, his pain no longer seemed so distant from Emma's pain. But for him, there was a big difference. He knew what he had lost and was beginning to accept that he might never be able to recover it. He was not the man Emma would need now. She had already learned painfully that a man's empty promises were not enough to heal a broken heart. And me? Well, I was there, observing, trying to be the support everyone needed, trying once again to do what I knew best, support. I knew Emma was not yet ready to forgive Vincent, but I also knew that forgiveness is not something that can be forced. It was her internal journey. It was not something anyone could give her, only she herself. That afternoon, when I found Emma in the orphanage courtyard, she seemed calmer, but I could see that something was on her mind. I knew she was deciding how she felt about everything that had happened. She looked at me with those green eyes, so full of wisdom and pain, and said, "Dorothy, I know Vincent is trying, but I don't know if I can trust him yet. He tells me he loves me, that he wants to be my father, but he wasn't my father when I needed him most. How can I let him back into my life after everything he did? I feel lost. I don't know what to do." I sat beside her, trying to find the right words not to pressure her. I knew that no matter how hard I tried, the answers were not in me, nor in the words I could say. They were in herself. But I also knew that, more than anything, she needed to know that she didn't have to make a decision now. She didn't have to resolve everything in one day. "Emma, no one is asking you to forgive Vincent immediately. No one is asking you to accept him without question. What you are feeling right now is valid. What you need to do is give yourself permission to feel everything you're going through. If you can't forgive him, if you can't trust him, that's fine. Forgiveness is a process, not an obligation." She looked at me for a moment, as if weighing my words, and then said, "I don't know if I'll be able to, Dorothy. I know he's trying, but I don't know if it's enough. I don't know if a simple apology will make a difference." It's not simple, Emma. It's not simple. Forgiveness doesn't come out of nowhere. It comes from your own journey, and when you're ready, you'll know what to do. You'll find your way. She nodded slowly, still with an expression of doubt on her face, but with something more as well. She no longer felt pressured, but was beginning to understand that the choice about Vincent didn't have to be made all at once. She didn't have to decide everything now, and that somehow was freeing her to move forward. That night, Vincent sought me out, and I knew what he wanted. He wanted an answer. He wanted me to say that Emma was ready to forgive him, that she was willing to accept his paternity. But what he didn't understand was that that wasn't what she needed. She didn't need a father who tried to fix things with quick actions, with promises of love. She needed time. She needed trust. And that trust would only come when Vincent truly began to free himself from his own guilt. "Dorothy, I know I'm losing her. I know she no longer sees me as her father, but I don't know what to do. I don't know how to win her trust back. I hurt her, I know. But please, tell me there's still a chance. Tell me I can still be her father." I looked at him, feeling a mixture of compassion and frustration. He was desperately trying to find a way to fix everything with gestures, but that wasn't how it worked. That wasn't how things happened. "Vincent, you can't fix everything with words, and you can't expect Emma to forgive you now. You have to be patient. You have to give her the space she needs. Forgiveness, when it comes, will be hers, but she cannot be forced to forgive, and it won't be done in a day or a month. What you can do now is be honest. Tell her what you feel, not what you think she wants to hear." He remained silent for a long time, and I saw the pain on his face. He was really trying, but he didn't understand that, for Emma to accept him, he would need to give her space to make her own decision. He couldn't rush it. The next morning, when I went to Emma, I found her sitting on the porch, her gaze lost once again. But this time, something had changed. She no longer had that weight in her eyes, that feeling of permanent doubt. She seemed calmer, as if she had finally found some peace, or at least the acceptance that it was not yet time for definitive answers. "Dorothy," she began, her voice low, but with a clarity I hadn't heard before. "I talked to Vincent, and even if I still don't know what to do, I think I'm starting to understand. I know he loves me, but I also know he failed me, and maybe I'll never be able to forgive him for that. But I don't need to forgive him to move on." I sat beside her, smiling slightly. "You're doing what's best for you, Emma, and that's what matters. Forgiveness is not an obligation. You will find your own way to deal with it." She looked at me with a small but genuine smile. "I know. I just wish things were different, but I guess I'm starting to accept that they won't be, and that's okay. I always knew deep down that the truth would be the turning point for all of us. It wasn't a simple truth. It wasn't something that could be easily absorbed or processed. The pain Emma felt, the guilt Vincent carried, all of this could not be resolved with a simple explanation or gesture of regret. The truth was a long road, and that road needed to be traveled by each of us, with patience, with courage, and with a strength that, often, we didn't even know we had. Now, months after Vincent's revelation, after all the confusion and all the moments of silence and reflection, I began to see what I hoped for, but didn't know if I would have the strength to wait for: transformation. The change wasn't instantaneous, but it was real. It wasn't the perfection we all imagined, but it was the acceptance that, in the end, each of us had the chance to reinvent ourselves, to forgive ourselves, to start over. Emma was different. No longer the lost girl who tried to cling to an image of a father who never existed, but now a child who was beginning to understand the depth of her own pain and the strength she had to move forward. She no longer needed to choose between Vincent and her mother, between what had been done and what could be, because she knew that forgiveness would come in her own time, on her own terms. That day, she was in the garden with Gabriel, the dog Vincent had given her, playing happily. The sun was low, tinging everything with a golden light, and there was something about Emma that seemed lighter. She had found peace on her own terms, and when she saw me, her smile, though still a little melancholic, was now genuine. "Dorothy, I think I'm starting to understand what you told me." She looked at the dog, who was chasing a ball, and then at me, with a deeper look. "I can't change what happened. I can't change the fact that Vincent failed me, but that won't define me. I won't be defined by the pain he caused me. And as difficult as it is, I know I can move forward." I sat beside her, feeling the weight of those words. Emma was growing before my eyes. She was learning that the pain hadn't destroyed her, but had shaped her in a new way. I knew she still had a long way to go, but there was something in her voice, something in her posture, that told me she was ready to move forward. "You're already doing it, Emma. You're moving forward. And no matter what happens, you have control over your own life. You have the right to decide how you want to live, without having to cling to the past." She looked at the dog again, now lying beside her, and smiled. "I think I finally understood, Dorothy. I can be who I want to be, and no one, not Vincent, nor anyone else, can change that." Vincent, in a way, was even more lost than Emma, but the big difference was that he knew it. He knew he couldn't just go back and try to fix everything. He was no longer the man Emma imagined him to be, and no matter how much he wanted to be that man, he was beginning to realize that redemption wouldn't come through grand gestures, but through consistent actions, and more importantly, through the acceptance of his own guilt. I found him in his house, sitting on one of the sofas with a distant look. He was older now, more tired, but also more humble, more aware of his flaws. When he saw me, he raised his head, and for a moment, he was silent, as if waiting for me to say something. "Dorothy," he said, his voice low and full of regret, "I know there's no turning back. I know I can't erase what I did, but I want to try. I want to try to be someone Emma can, somehow, accept. I don't expect her to forgive me, but I hope that someday she sees that I tried to change." I sat beside him, trying to understand what he felt. I knew he wasn't asking for forgiveness selfishly, but because he finally understood what he would need to do to truly be the father Emma needed. But there was one thing he didn't know. For her to accept him, he would first need to accept himself. "Vincent," I began, my voice soft, "you've already taken an important step. You're accepting the pain, the guilt, and that's more than many can do. But true change, true redemption, comes from within you. Emma won't accept this overnight, but you need to continue. You need to be honest with yourself, not just with her. Don't get lost in what happened in the past. Accept what you did, and with time, she will see that you are trying." He nodded slowly, his eyes filled with deep sadness, but also with a small spark of hope. I knew he wouldn't be the perfect man Emma dreamed of, but perhaps he could be the man she needed, and perhaps, with time, he could forgive himself. A few days later, when the last adoption follow-up meeting arrived, Vincent was nervous. I knew he expected Emma to make a decision, and I knew the pressure was enormous for everyone. But something in me told me that the final decision was not up to Vincent, nor to me, nor to anyone but Emma. She already knew what she needed to do, and what Vincent didn't understand was that she didn't need him to move forward. When Emma entered the office, she was calm, with a firmer gaze than ever. She looked at Vincent and saw me beside him. There was no anger in her eyes, no frustration. There was understanding. She approached with a calm smile and said, almost in a whisper, "I don't know if I'll forgive you, Vincent, but I know I can move forward, with or without you. What you did won't define me, and what you do now won't either. I no longer need your permission to be who I am." Vincent remained silent, speechless. I knew he was struggling with the pain of rejection, but the most important thing was that he was listening. He knew he could no longer force anything, that Emma needed to find her own truth in her own time. "I understand," Vincent replied, his voice low. "I know I made a mistake. I know I can't go back. But if one day you give me the chance, I will try to be the father you deserve." Emma didn't answer immediately, but the way she looked at him gave me the feeling that she was no longer lost. She was beginning to accept that the truth, however difficult, was the key to her freedom. She no longer needed anyone's approval. She was beginning to write her own story. In the days that followed, things began to calm down. Vincent was taking slower steps now, more aware of his actions. Emma, in turn, was allowing herself to live her life without carrying the weight of a past she hadn't chosen. I, although still concerned about the path everyone was on, knew that they were, finally, following their own paths. And I also knew that true healing didn't come from promises, but from actions. Vincent still had a long way to go. Emma too. But at least the truth was finally free. And now, more than ever, everyone had the chance to start over. I looked at the horizon, knowing that, despite everything they had faced, there was a future before them. And perhaps this was the beginning of what truly mattered. Forgiveness, acceptance, healing. All of this began to build on the foundation of truth. And now, more than ever, everyone had the chance to start over.
On a cold October day, a man walked in. Expensive cologne, distant eyes, carried the weight of years of secrets he wanted to adopt. But without looking her in the eyes, called it a noble gesture, but hid a stained past, broken, tainted.
At the orphanage, a girl with ocean eyes dreamed of fairy tales, just wanted to love. But she didn't know that the hero in her story was also the one who made her cry.
Silence weighs heavier than time. Dorothy watches, feels the wind of words never spoken, of forgiveness yet deserved. Emma silently wonders, how can I love without knowing? If the truth left unspoken hurt more than those that are said, if the embrace of someone who lies hurts deeper than life itself, who will save me from this story of lies and of pain? I just wanted to be a child and not carry this love.
Vincent tries to fix with promises, gifts, silence in his eyes. But guilt doesn't vanish with presence. Time doesn't turn back, it never lies.
Dorothy holds the child's hand, shows that courage is to feel, not to hide. The past knocks begging redemption. Emma holds confusion inside. She doesn't need to forgive to move on, but she must learn that what defines her story is the courage to choose. If the truths left unspoken hurt more than those that are said, if the embrace of someone who lies hurts deeper than life itself, who will save me from this story of lies and of pain? I just wanted to be a child
And not carry this love.
Truth sets you free, even when it hurts. Forgiveness can't be bought, it's born in tears. Between guilt and hope, a new tomorrow dawns. Emma looks at the sun, discovers who she is, and learns little by little to love herself too. Truths now spoken are healing my wounds. The love I never had, I learned to give myself. If the past can't be erased, at last I choose to be greater than the pain,
And rewrite my own end.